Journey to Older Tales. The boy who left home to learn fear.
Once upon a time, a father lived with his two sons in a village. The older son was smart and capable, always succeeding in whatever he tried. The younger son, however, was foolish and could learn nothing. Above all, he never understood what it meant to shudder with fear. People often laughed and mocked him, saying,
"That boy will only bring trouble to his father. What can a fool like him possibly do?"
Yet, the boy didn't care about their laughter. Instead, he was filled with curiosity.
Why do people tremble when they are scared? What is this thing called shuddering?
One day, his father spoke to him sternly.
It's time for you to learn a trade and make something of yourself.
But the boy's eyes sparkled as he exclaimed,
Before anything else, I want to learn what it means to shudder.
The boy's father sighed deeply upon hearing his request. A visiting church sexton said,
"If that's what he wants, I can teach him."
Glad to be rid of his troublesome son, the father sent the boy to the sexton. The boy's task was to ring the church bell each day. One night, the sexton ordered him to climb the church tower and ring the bell. The sexton himself went up first, planning to stand motionless like a ghost. When the boy reached the bell rope and saw a white figure, he called out,
Who's there? Answer me or I'll push you down.
But the sexton did not reply and remained motionless. The boy shouted again.
If you don't answer, I will really push you down.
Still, the figure did not move. So the boy rushed forward and shoved it down the stairs. The figure was none other than the sexton, who tumbled down and broke his leg. After ringing the bell, the boy went home and fell asleep as if nothing had happened. The next day, the sexton's daughter ran to the boy's father, crying,
"Your son pushed my father down the stairs and broke his leg."
Furious, the father turned to his son and said,
You must leave this house at once.
The boy was banished from his home, but he felt no sadness. Instead, he thought excitedly,
Now I finally have the chance to learn what it means to shudder.
Before he left, his father gave him 50 thalers and said,
Never tell anyone that I am your father. I am ashamed of you.
The boy took the money and replied,
All right, father, but I still want to learn how to shudder.
And so, he set off alone into the world. As he walked down the road, he kept muttering to himself,
Oh, if only I could learn how to shudder.
As the boy walked, he met a man who overheard him muttering. The man laughed and said,
If you want to learn how to shudder, spend a night beneath the gallows. 7 men hang there.
Intrigued, the boy headed to the gallows. He built a fire and settled in for the night. The wind howled, and something above him swayed and creaked, but he felt no fear. The next morning, the boy returned to the village and declared loudly,
I still haven't learned what it means to shudder.
A tavern owner, polishing a glass, overheard him and chuckled.
Well, a fearless one, aren't you? Have you heard of the haunted castle nearby?
The boy's eyes sparkled with curiosity.
A haunted castle? What's that?
The tavern owner leaned in, his voice lowering as if sharing a secret.
It's an old cursed castle where ghosts are said to roam. Many have entered, but none have ever returned. But if you can survive 3 nights there, the king will reward you by marrying you to the princess.
The boy's face lit up with excitement.
Just 3 nights? That sounds like fun. I'll do it.
Without wasting time, he marched straight to the palace and stood before the king, announcing boldly,
I want to take on the haunted castle challenge. I'll stay there for 3 nights.
The king raised an eyebrow, intrigued by the boy's confidence.
You're brave indeed. But there's a rule. You may bring only 3 items with you into the castle. What will you choose?
Said the king. The boy paused, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. Then, with a grin, he answered.
A fire, a lathe, and a cutting board with a knife.
The king blinked in surprise.
A lathe and a cutting board? Why those?
But the boy chuckled playfully.
Oh, I have my reasons, trust me. They'll come in handy.
Though puzzled by the strange request, the king nodded and ordered his servants to prepare the items. That evening, as the full moon rose high into the sky, the boy stood before the towering gates of the haunted castle, holding his 3 chosen items: a blazing fire, a sturdy lathe, and a cutting board with a sharp knife. The castle loomed before him, its ancient stone walls covered in creeping vines. Its tall windows stared out like hollow, empty eyes. The wind howled, and with a chilling screech, the massive doors creaked open on their own. From within, faint whispers seemed to beckon him inside. But the boy showed no fear. With a determined smirk, he stepped forward and muttered.
All right, let's see if this place can finally teach me how to shudder.
And with steady steps, he vanished into the heart of the castle's darkness. The boy sat by the fire inside the dark castle.
Oh, when will I ever learn to shudder?
Suddenly, from a shadowy corner, he heard a strange sound.
It's so cold here.
Turning his head, he saw 2 large black cats approaching the fire. Their glowing red eyes stared at him as they whispered.
Shall we play a game of cards?
The boy grinned and said,
Sure, but first show me your claws.
The black cats extended their paws, revealing dangerously sharp claws. The boy tilted his head and said,
With claws like these, you might tear the cards. Shall I trim them a bit?
Carefully, he picked up the cats and placed them on the cutting board, preparing to trim their claws. One of them gazed at him with glowing eyes, while the other silently stepped back and, without warning, leaped into the fire and disappeared. After the black cats vanished, a chilling sound echoed through the darkness. From the shadows emerged more creatures, black dogs and cats dragging red-hot chains behind them. Their eyes burned like crimson embers, and the screeching sound of metal scraping against the stone floor filled the castle with an eerie tension. The creatures circled the fire the boy had built, their dark forms casting flickering shadows across the walls. The flames crackled, sending sparks into the air, but the beasts crept closer, their intent clear, to smother the fire and plunge the room into cold darkness. But the boy stood his ground, gripping his knife tightly, and shouted,
Don't put out my fire! If you do, I'll have to stay awake all night!
His voice rang through the castle, firm and unwavering. The black dogs growled low, their teeth bared, and the cats arched their backs, hissing with glowing eyes. Yet, the boy's eyes burned with a courage far hotter than the flames before him. The creatures charged, but the boy did not retreat. He swung his knife, driving them back with swift, fearless strikes. The clash of claws and steel echoed through the stone chamber, and fiery sparks scattered with every lunge. A chorus of growls and screeches filled the air, but the boy's resolve was unshakable. At last, beaten by his fearless resistance, the ghostly beasts let out a shrill cry and melted back into the shadows from which they came. The boy, his chest heaving from the fight, turned back to his fire. With steady hands, he gathered more wood and stoked the flames until they roared back to life, filling the room with warmth and light. Satisfied, he lay down beside the crackling fire, exhaustion tugging at his eyelids. With a faint smile, he murmured to himself,
Still, I don't feel the slightest bit of shuddering.
And with that, he closed his eyes and drifted into a peaceful sleep, the fire burning steadily by his side, standing as a testament to his unshakable courage through the night. In the middle of the night, as the boy curled up near the fire, drifting into sleep, a sudden creak broke the silence. The bed beneath him began to shake and groan.
What's going on?
He muttered, his eyes snapping open. But before he could react, the bed jolted forward, rumbling as if it had a life of its own. With a thunderous crash, the bed burst into motion, racing wildly through the castle halls. It sped down the corridors, slamming into walls and bouncing off with a loud thud, toppling a tall candelabrum in its path. Candles clattered to the floor, and their flames flickered wildly, casting chaotic shadows on the stone walls. But instead of screaming in fear, the boy threw his hands up into the air and laughed.
Faster, faster, let's go!
He shouted with delight. As if obeying his command, the bed surged forward even faster. It thundered up a massive stone staircase, each impact shaking the ancient walls. With a mighty crash, it smashed through an old wooden door, sending bricks tumbling and thick clouds of dust billowing into the air. Amid the chaos, the boy's laughter rang out.
Ha ha, this is the most fun I've ever had.
But suddenly, the bed lurched violently upward, soared into the air, and flipped upside down.
Whoa!
The boy cried out, then thump. He hit the cold stone floor with a heavy crash. For a moment, all was still. But then, the boy, lying flat on his back, burst into laughter. He sat up, dusted himself off, and looked at the overturned bed with a playful grin.
Tired already, huh? Well, you sure gave me a good ride. Whew, what a wild ride. But still, I haven't felt a single shiver.
He sighed. With the gentle crackling of the fire as his lullaby, the boy closed his eyes and drifted peacefully into sleep. As the boy sat by the fire, resting, a sudden crash echoed from the chimney. Thud. Something heavy hit the floor. It was half of a doll, broken and worn. Yet, the boy showed no fear and muttered,
This is only half. Bring me the other piece.
No sooner had he spoken than a bang sounded, and the other half fell from the chimney. The two pieces slid toward each other and came together with a sharp creak and click. They fused into one, forming a giant doll with glowing eyes. The boy, unfazed, simply patted the ground beside him and said,
Sit here. Let's warm ourselves by the fire.
The doll, creaking and groaning, lowered itself beside the boy. The fire crackled softly, casting their shadows side by side on the stone walls. It wrapped their strange and mysterious night in a warm, flickering glow. As the boy sat by the fire, warming himself once more, the old wooden door creaked open slowly, its hinges groaning. A towering old man stepped heavily into the room, his boots echoing against the stone floor. His long white beard flowed down to his chest, and a chilling aura surrounded him. His eyes burned coldly as he glared at the boy. His voice was rough and thunderous.
At last someone has come to teach you real fear.
He raised a massive giant axe, its sharp blade gleaming menacingly in the firelight as he marched forward. But the boy, unfazed, simply smirked and said,
All right, but I'm strong too. Let's see who wins.
As the old man swung his axe down, the boy dodged swiftly and grabbed the man's arm, locking him into a fierce struggle. Their shadows danced wildly on the stone walls, and the fire crackled under the tension. In a sudden, sharp move, the boy twisted free, raised the axe, and sliced off the old man's long beard. With a loud howl of pain, the old man clutched his face, his voice trembling with shock and anger.
Ah, my beard!
Humiliated and defeated, he dropped his axe with a clang and fled from the room, his heavy steps fading quickly down the hallway. The boy chuckled, brushing his hands together.
Fear? Nah. Chopping his beard was way more fun.
After the old man vanished, silence returned to the castle until a strange, low rumbling echoed from deep within the basement. Guided by curiosity, the boy carefully descended the damp, shadowed staircase to the basement. The air smelled of mildew and stone, cold and heavy. But there, tucked between the cracked stone walls, stood 3 large treasure chests overflowing with gold, glinting softly in the dim light. Suddenly, cutting through the chill of the air, a familiar but ghostly voice of the old man echoed from nowhere.
The first is for the poor, the second for the king, and the third is yours."
The boy's eyes glimmered as he listened. He nodded solemnly and said,
Understood. I will honor your wish.
The moment he reached out and closed the lids of the chests, the entire castle trembled with a deep, resonant hum. A radiant glow swept through the walls, and with it, every restless spirit dissolved into light, vanishing peacefully. The cursed, crumbling fortress began to change, the cracks in the walls sealed, the tattered banners grew whole, and warm sunlight streamed through the windows as if the castle had awoken from a long nightmare. The boy stood in the grand hall, bathed in the golden glow from a newly lit chandelier above. With a soft smile, he murmured,
In the end, it wasn't fear I found here, but warmth.
At last, he had conquered the haunted castle, not with fear, but with courage and heart. When the king heard that the boy had survived the haunted castle, he rushed to meet him. With a commanding voice, he declared,
"You have done it. Now prepare to marry my daughter."
The princess stood beside the king, radiant and graceful. But the boy hesitated, his brow furrowed in thought.
All right, but I still haven't learned how to shudder.
The king and princess exchanged puzzled, almost comical looks. But soon, the king chuckled and extended his hand.
"No matter. You are brave enough. A grand wedding you shall have."
A few days later, the entire kingdom gathered for a magnificent celebration. The boy, dressed in a royal robe adorned with gold, stood proudly as the wedding bells rang. Cheers and applause filled the air as the boy became the most celebrated figure in the kingdom, known not only for his bravery but also for his heart. Amidst the joy, the boy smiled softly and whispered to himself,
I may not have learned to shudder, but I've learned something warmer.
The princess was deep in thought on their wedding night.
How can I teach my husband to shudder?
Beside her, the maid grinned mischievously and whispered,
Princess, I know just the perfect trick.
That night, the maid filled a bucket with freezing water and added small, slippery fish, giggling softly. The princess carefully lifted her husband's blanket and gave the maid a secret nod. Without hesitation, the maid poured the icy water all over the sleeping boy.
Ah!
The boy's eyes shot open as he jolted upright, kicking off the soaked blanket.
What is this? It's freezing. I'm shuddering.
The princess and the maid burst into laughter, their eyes sparkling with delight. The boy, shivering and dripping wet, finally realized.
So, this is what it means to feel a shudder.
At last, the boy had learned how to shudder.
I hope today's fairy tale brought you joy and happiness. I'll return with an even more special story next time. Thank you for watching.